I just spoke with Special Envoy Witkoff, and these talks, as of right now, are still scheduled. President Trump is always wanting to pursue diplomacy first, but obviously it takes two to tango. You need a willing partner to achieve diplomacy. As always, though, of course, the president has a range of options on the table with respect to Iran.
Right now, the White House and the Pentagon on high alert as Iran's military attempts to target Americans in the Middle East escalate right now. The latest comes just days before a critical meeting to discuss what's next for the collapsing Iranian regime. And thanks for joining us. I'm Jan Jeffcoat. It is Wednesday, February 4th. And this morning, the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism is putting negotiations with the U.S. in jeopardy. It's the latest sign of growing desperation from Iran as the regime struggles to hold on to power. Angela Brown joining us right now from the live desk with the latest on this. Angela, good morning to you. You know, Iranian leaders reportedly trying to change the terms of talks with the U.S. later this week. What's going on with that?
Yeah, that's what we're hearing, that they want to change the location and actually restrict talks. We're going to get to that in a second. But right now, as you mentioned, Jan, right before this week's meeting between the U.S. officials and Iran, things basically are getting turned up a notch. The USS Abraham Lincoln was forced to shoot down a drone linked to Iran. The vessel was docked in the Arabian Sea when an F-35 fighter jet was forced to deploy from the ship and then shoot down that drone. Now, no service members were injured and no equipment was destroyed. The War Department says their top priority with Iran remains diplomacy at this point, but that could quickly change.
Iran will not have nuclear weapons capabilities, and so they can either negotiate on that front or we have other options. That's why the War Department exists. He doesn't want to go that route. I don't want to go that route. But our job is to be prepared. And so, of course, we are. And we're more than prepared.
And we're also following this morning new developments for Iran as a meeting with U.S. leaders approaches this week. Iranian leaders are pushing to change the location of that meeting, exclude regional partners, and limit discussions on its nuclear program. The original meeting had been set to take place in Turkey, but now Iran wants to move it to the nation of Oman. President Trump said as of last night, they're still negotiating with Iran, but no changes have been announced. The meeting is slated to take place on Friday. We're watching the very latest on this developing story here at the live desk.
Angela, thank you. The U.S. Navy also on alert, monitoring for additional attacks by Iran after its military tried to seize a U.S.-flagged oil tanker. Yesterday, Iranian gunboats in the Strait of Hormuz approached and unsuccessfully tried to board the tanker before a U.S. Navy destroyer arrived. The U.S. tanker did not stop and is now being escorted by the U.S. military.
I'm national correspondent Kayla Gaskins in Washington. President Trump is again turning up the pressure on Iran, pushing for a nuclear deal as the U.S. continues a major military buildup in the Middle East. White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, are planning to meet with Iran's foreign minister Friday in Turkey to discuss a possible nuclear agreement. Representatives from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, and Oman will also reportedly be in attendance. If the meeting happens, it would mark the first direct talks between U.S. and Iran since negotiations collapsed last summer and the 12-day war between Iran and Israel broke out.
If war starts, that would be a disaster for everybody.
For the past few weeks, the United States has moved heavy military firepower into the region as President Trump keeps strikes on the table. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is warning any U.S. attack would trigger a regional war, to which Trump responded.
Hopefully we'll make a deal. If we don't make a deal, then we'll find out whether or not he was right.
President Trump says they've given Iran a deadline to make a deal. On Monday, a spokesperson for Iran's foreign minister speaking out against the U.S. military buildup.
What the United States is basically doing in our region amounts to a constant violation of the most fundamental principle of international law.
Reports emerging Monday that Iran's leadership is concerned U.S. military strikes could reignite protests inside the country. Demonstrators upset over Iran's economic crisis filled the streets across the country last month until a brutal government crackdown left thousands dead. Last week, Reuters reported re-energizing protesters to facilitate the conditions for a regime change is the main reason President Trump is weighing military strikes. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is set to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday amid these heightened tensions with Iran. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins.
Nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran are reportedly set for later this week. This comes after months of anti-government protests happening across Iran and thousands killed in the process. Let's go to Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team. Are there specific estimates that you found on the death toll among protesters yet? Because the numbers that I have seen vary depending really on who you ask.
Yeah, it's so difficult to get confirmed information out of Iran right now. But the Human Rights Activist News Agency, which is a U.S.-based advocacy organization for rights in Iran, reports there's been around 6,800 deaths confirmed and around 11,200 under investigation still. So this has been super difficult to track down because the Iranian government basically blacked out the internet connection, which limits communications internally and then obviously restricts people from the outside of the country from easily figuring out what's been going on and what the confirmed totals are.
And I'm sure, you know, with a military strike, one of the president's goals has got to be to get protesters back on the streets to overthrow the government. It sounds like on paper, though, nuclear negotiations, that seems to be a logical first step.
That's what I'm understanding, and that's what analysts are talking about. So the Atlantic Council, they released an analysis this week that highlights a pretty key political disconnect here. They talked about the fact that talking to Iran diplomatically right after its brutal massacre of protesters could be seen by many inside the country as a disappointment or even abandonment, kind of, especially when President Trump himself encouraged these protesters to keep protesting. But at the same time, Trump's been clear that negotiations are better than starting a new war and has warned that, quote unquote, bad things could happen if a deal isn't reached. So this is happening while the U.S. is also sending a large fleet of U.S. military vessels towards Iran. So we'll have to wait and see how these diplomatic efforts play out.
That's a good point, though. Emma, thank you.
Thanks.
And for more on this Fact Check team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code or visit thenationaldesk.com.
Mark, new this morning, a meeting officially on the books between the White House and Iranian negotiators in an effort to reach a nuclear and peace agreement. On Friday, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are set to hold talks with Iran's foreign minister in Istanbul. It's going to mark the first direct talks between the U.S. and Iran after negotiations collapsed during the 12-day war, which ended with U.S. forces destroying Iran's nuclear facilities.
Well, I can't tell you what I'm going to do because right now, you know, we have a tremendous force going there, just like we did in Venezuela, even bigger. And they'll be there soon. And I'd like to see a deal negotiated. I don't know that that's going to happen. But, I mean, if I knew, I wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't tell you. I'd be very foolish if I would tell you. But right now we're talking to them. We're talking to Iran. And if we could work something out, that'd be great. And if we can't,
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Didi Gatton, and tonight the White House says talks between the U.S. and Iranian officials are still planned for Friday after the U.S. military had to take action. Ryan Smith joins us at the live desk with how this incident unfolded in the Arabian Sea. Ryan?
Yeah, Didi, this latest incident here shows us that the tensions are really ramping up across the region. U.S. Central Command saying the U.S. shot down that Iranian drone flying aggressively toward a Navy aircraft carrier with, quote, unclear intent. The USS Abraham Lincoln was positioned approximately 500 miles from Iran's southern coastline. And according to CENTCOM tonight, quote, an F-35 stealth fighter jet from Abraham Lincoln shot down that Iranian drone in self-defense and to protect the aircraft carrier and personnel on board. Only hours later, we learned 2 gunboats from Iran's Revolutionary Guard approached a U.S. commercial tanker, threatening to board and seize that vessel. A U.S. warship responded, de-escalating the incident, according to CENTCOM. The White House now says diplomacy is the top priority here, but warned today President Trump is keeping the option open of military strikes.
Later this week, White House Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, and President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, are expected to travel to Istanbul to discuss a potential nuclear deal with Iran. Let's go to Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team. And of course, there is what the Trump administration wants out of these nuclear talks versus what is likely best case scenario and agreement, right?
Yeah, so President Trump, he's made his main goal pretty clear here, which is just essentially ensuring that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. So that's the main objective driving these diplomatic efforts. And that entails things like Iran would need to shut down its uranium enrichment program, also accepting major limits on its missile program. And also the U.S. wants Iran to stop throwing money and weapons at its regional proxy militias, groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. So those are kind of the main objectives when it comes to these negotiations.
And since the strikes from last year, much has obviously developed. Do experts anticipate a shift in these nuclear talks? What else are you learning?
So Nate Swanson, who is the director of the Iran Strategy Project at the Atlantic Council, he wrote a really interesting piece about these potential talks, and he said that the meetings could serve as kind of a strategic purpose beyond just basic negotiations. So he talked about the possibility that they could keep Iran off balance, buy time, and give the U.S. some leverage ahead of potential military or economic pressure that could come, rather than signifying kind of a quick shift to diplomacy, especially considering the fact that Iran just massacred thousands of protesters. So there's a lot of complexities and things at play here.
Emma, thank you.
Thanks.
In a few moments, Emma will join us to dig deeper into the protests happening in Iran and how a potential nuclear deal could impact them.